Mr. Shadab.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today and testify on executive pay and the role of compensation consultants. I am a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center, a research, education, and outreach organization affiliated with George Mason University. The Mercatus Center's mission is to bridge academics and policy. We conduct interdisciplinary research in the social sciences that integrates practice and theory. My own research focuses primarily on securities and financial markets regulation. My remarks today will focus on 1, the academic law and economics literature regarding explanations for increased compensation of public company executives, and 2, other empirical findings relevant to potential conflicts of interest among executive compensation consultants. The ultimate goal of any system of corporate governance, and the criterion by which to judge good from bad governance, is promoting the wealth of shareholders. Today, a corporation is primarily governed by its board of directors, which is typically responsible for setting executive compensation. The New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ listing standards passed in the wake of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 require a majority of a company's board to be independent, and the New York Stock Exchange in particular requires wholly independent compensation committees. Although setting excessive executive compensation may violate directors' fiduciary duties to shareholders, compensation decisions are made in the ordinary course of business and therefore are afforded substantial judicial deference under a long-standing pillar of American corporate law known as the business judgment rule. Currently, there is a dispute among academics as to the precise source of the increases in executive compensation that took place over the past decades and years. One influential line of thought argues that increased CEO compensation is the result of entrenched CEOs unduly influencing directors to grant themselves excessive pay to the detriment of shareholders. While certainly possible, the managerial entrenchment theory fails to explain why CEO compensation continued to increase even while boards of directors were becoming increasingly independent of management, at least as far back from 1997 to the present. Another problem with the entrenchment theory already referred to at this hearing was that to be able to capture a board, a manager should almost likely be employed by the corporation to establish the requisite close ties with directors to capture them. However, empirical evidence shows that CEOs promoted from within a company earn about 15% less than CEOs hired from the outside, and that this premium for outside hires actually grew throughout the 70s and through the 90s. Now, just because the managerial entrenchment theory does not explain all the data does not mean it is completely wrong. However, there are in fact other explanations for the increases in absolute and relative executive compensation. Indeed, a substantial body of recent empirical corporate governance research finds that executive compensation is primarily the result of increased value of corporate assets, increased competitive pressures faced by executives and corporations, and increased liability and regulatory risk stemming from passage of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. As former Labor Secretary Robert Reich has noted, although CEO compensation does not reflect social and moral worth, increased CEO pay is best explained not by the entrenchment theory, but by boards of directors choosing their CEOs from a relatively small pool of executive talent, and that today, quote, under super competitive capitalism, boards are willing to pay more for CEOs because their rivals are paying more. And the cost of making a bad decision is so much greater than it was decades ago when competition for investors and customers was far less intense and shareholders were far more placid. Indeed, a recent study by the Federal Reserve on compensation from 1936 to 2005 concluded that compensation arrangements have served to tie the wealth of managers to firm performance and perhaps to align managerial incentives with shareholders' interests for most of the 20th century. Further, the rise in income inequality between top earners and average employees can perhaps be explained by technological progress raising the productivity of skilled workers more than it raises the productivity of less skilled workers. For instance, email and video conferencing have arguably helped executives add more value to their day-to-day activities than factory workers. Taken as a whole, many studies deeply call into question the assumption that increased executive compensation eats into corporate profits and thereby hurts investors. Indeed, they suggest that current levels of executive pay largely reflect the benefits that good CEOs create for shareholders. Regarding potential conflicts of interest or a lack of independence of compensation consultants who also provide non-compensation services, I simply want to draw the committee's attention to the empirical record on the provision of non-audit services so that the wrong lesson is not learned. Although corporate governance reforms, such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, prohibit auditors from providing non-audit services to audit clients, The empirical record strongly supports the view that auditor independence is not jeopardized by providing non-audit services. In a 2005 review of the empirical literature regarding the provision of non-audit services, Yale law professor Roberto Romano found that the overwhelming majority of the numerous studies on the issue found no relationship between audit quality and the provision of non-audit services, and in fact 3 studies found that auditors providing non-audit services actually improved audit quality. In addition, in 2006, yet another academic study found that the provision of non-audit services improves audit quality. A general reason why providing non-audit services may improve audit quality is because auditors benefit in their auditing work from so-called knowledge spillovers. The knowledge auditors gain about the company from providing non-audit services may enable them to conduct a more effective audit. The provision of non-compensation services may similarly have no or even a positive impact on compensation decisions. I would like to again thank the committee for inviting me to share my views.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shadab.